Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you live around the world. As I mentioned in the last or previous video, I was going to come back to this and look at a few more of the design considerations before we move on with some other aspects of the development of the geodesic drawings. From our model, we know that these measurements are pretty much set in stone at the get-go of when we created our base model dome. This is unexpanded more than it was from the previous video, or when we showed it that we expanded it by 300%, and we mentioned that from the apex to the base was about 2 meters, which it is. Also said that ideally the target would be to have this height here of around 2 meters. Well, we can see that it's only half that, and already we've got a span of 4 meters. So, using that criteria as a guide, we have to double it again. So, I'll expand that, scale it, times 2. Giving me the preferred, subjective, but preferred height of 2 meters. The reason for that is most people can walk around inside the dome. Once they're inside it, they've got the clear area within which to walk and not bang their heads. I'm a bit shorter than 2 meters, as most people are, but this certainly is a yardstick. That's why I said between 1.6 meters to 2 meters. If this span starts to get too big, well, you can drop it back a little bit if you want. It also gives you a nice headroom. My target range is around about the 3 to 3.6 meters. Obviously, with this particular shape, I'd have to have a dome this big to give that height. If I wanted to, as I said, I can scale it back until I get maybe 1800 or so height at that point. We've dropped it back almost a full meter in span, and we've got 3.6, which is kind of my pleasing to the eye height. Very subjective. You can achieve the smaller base by rotating these legs, and they don't have to stay in the dome position. They can be swung in. That'll pop the height of the dome up a little bit and draw the base dimensions, the spans, in a little bit. You could do that. There's also no reason whatsoever, because you're basing this, all your measurements will be based off of the computer. There's no reason why you can't squish it to get, or stretch it. There is no reason whatsoever. Is it suggested? Probably not, but it's certainly not beyond the considerations. Right, I'm just going to do something here. I rotate this 90 degrees just to show that when we line it up, because this is in perspective, it sometimes doesn't show up as being these legs being vertical or flush in section or alignment. By doing this, you can see that they actually are. Had I taken that was the floor that I rotated up, you can see that they are perfectly vertical in plane. And that helps when you're going to make a structure that has an enclosure. The problem being is that this area here is still sloped back, and that in another video will be something we'll be touching on. Now, something I also mentioned was as you go bigger, you can run into the difficulties with the practical lengths of the timber. Economically, the smaller the section size, the better, but structurally, maybe that's not so much of a good idea. You can go too small, and then they have other problems that you may need to address if you want to keep that section size by putting intermediate struts or nogs, dwangs in place. I made a comment about the strength, and I'm just going to put in a 100 by 50 piece of, or a rectangle, draw it out 3 meters. And I made the comment about what's strong and what is not strong. And it's all to do not with the section size, not simply from the section size, but largely its orientation to the horizontal or the vertical. In this orientation, the 100 by 50 timber is in its strongest position vertically. Laterally, it has got 2 different strengths. As you'd understand, along this axis it would be stronger than along this axis because of the dimension, but its strongest position is vertical as it is now. But none of these in a dome is vertical. So you've got to consider that when you place this on an angle, the strength of the 4x2, what I call it because I'm a bit older, or the 100 by 50, is reduced. It may not necessarily be reduced a lot, and in a dome they are of a length that mitigates that. And as you can see, the shorter ones are at the top, which would be more horizontal than the ones on the bottom in this scenario, in this version. Now that's a good thing, because the shorter lengths are going to be stronger for the same section size. Where they get longer here, they're more vertical, so they're gaining some of their strength or capability back. So it's maybe only these ones that need shoring up with intermediate ones, and these ones can be left alone. Now, whether that would visually look pleasing or not, that's up to the individual to make that decision. But a large dome at say 8 meters span in this scenario, the length of this strut is 2.5 meters long. You're starting to get to the point where you have to consider shoring it up, and I would be given that a consideration, or in the lower levels using a heavier timber. That's a consideration. You may want to use a 6x2 in this area here, and maybe 4x2s up here. Now, does that create a visual impairment? Maybe. Is there practical considerations? Maybe. And it also depends whether you're using the individual panels or hubs. So if you're using the where all the timbers come together in a star pattern, it's a consideration, or a hub. Or my preferred version on a construction basis is to have each individual triangle made separately and then them attached. Visually, the hub is better, but it's much more complex, and you've got to get the hubs made or find a source that can make the hubs of a dimension to fit what you want for your area. Because I know around the world the dimensions of available timber or lumber varies a lot, so too will the requirement for any hubs. Hence the practical nature of where you have individually made triangles works everywhere, because it sidesteps the requirement to have a specific lumber size or dimension. Okay, I think that'll do for this video. I'll try and keep the videos to around 10 or 12 minutes, just because listening to my voice is probably the maximum that you can tolerate. But hopefully the information as we step through, you start to understand some of the criteria that I think is required when you're developing up a project like this. Okay, I will leave it there, and I'll come back in the next video, and we may look at the next or the continuation of the development of how we draw the geodesic dome. Okay, see you later. Bye.